Today's color code is number 231. We got the code, now let's get to cracking. Well. Looks like we have some Pharaoh and Ball fanatics in the house. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm a huge fan of their colors, so let's talk about today's color code of number 231, which is called Setting Plaster. 3 color codes in a row about Pharaoh and Ball. Well, why not? If you haven't yet seen an episode of Color Code, it's where we crack the code on color selection. I'm going to break down this color in detail, so you know what kind of color it is. We're also going to talk about some color pairings that work with it. Also, of course, we'll let you know a trim color that you can use, or maybe 2, and then we'll let you know how to best use setting plaster in your home. So this color was requested by some of you, and I'm really intrigued by it because it's not necessarily your run-of-the-mill off-white or grayish color, because in the paint world, the plaster we use most often is white in its coloration. But plaster can come in a variety of colors, like a pinky brown color as seen right here in this picture, so never prejudge a color by its color name. Just judge it after the fact, because some names are absolutely ridiculous. I guess that's the main takeaway here. Setting plaster is sort of a mix of that deeper peachy brown color and your classic off-white plaster color, giving you a beautiful, blushing, dusty pink that is soft and elegant, and much like a lot of the other Pharaoh and Ball colors, it comes with a timeless sophistication that seems to mesh really well with more traditional decor and even the uber modern contemporary stuff. Its LRV is right around 70, and that makes it an objectively lighter color, but not so light that you would misinterpret it for being an off-white. It's technically in the brown family of colors, as one of the main components of it is brown, but it's the added red inside that gives it that peachy little pinkiness, which definitely comes through pretty prominently. What prevents it from feeling like a straight up pink is a subtle champagne golden touch, which settles the color down ever so slightly and allows it to retain a noticeable warmth. It's this duality of fresh pink and a bit of yellow that allows it to act as a wonderful backdrop against darker woods, but also modern cooler grays as seen in this picture. What colors do I enjoy pairing with setting plaster? I really like to balance the high-tier elegance of setting plaster with some grounded, earthy, nature-infused colors, and when I started looking for this perfect pairing color, the first place I naturally wanted to look was the fairly new Pharaoh and Ball color collection called Color by Nature. This was a color palette that was done in partnership with the Natural History Museum in London, which is notoriously a global authority on all things nature related. It's a pretty cool partnership, I gotta admit. But the color that I ended up choosing from this collection to pair with setting plaster is called Sap Green. It's extremely rich and grounded as a color, and because it is predominantly green and a tad woody brown as well, it's going to have a natural, semi-complementary nature with the pink aspect in setting plaster. They end up also coordinating as well because, as you know, setting plaster also has a bit of that brown going on in the background, and there is that commonality between the two colors. So it is an interesting interaction between the two. They work together, but also contrast with one another in a really beautiful way. Whether you use one as the accent and the other as the more predominant color, I honestly could see both situations working really well, albeit with very different results. Sap Green is much darker, so the space will feel more dramatic as the main color, while setting plaster will add a really nice, effortless, fun-loving nature to whatever room you use it in as the main color. For another pairing color that's perhaps a bit more tame, but still interesting, would be the color Parma Gray. Of course by Pharaoh and Ball as well. This color pairing is going to be lighter in general, and Parma Gray reads a little more as a bluish gray that is still fairly clean in how it comes across. It's perhaps a bit darker than setting plaster, but not by much, which means these two are a little more interchangeable. While you might be tempted to go with the cooler gray as your main colors on your walls, and then you put setting plaster as your accent color, I would probably do the exact opposite actually. I think I would much rather utilize the peachy pinky color more, and then have the little pops of gray as accent pieces throughout. Just to remind ourselves that the vice grip that gray had on interior decorating is slowly starting to loosen up a little bit, but there's still definitely room for it in modern design, so again, not hating on gray, but I don't want to use it everywhere anymore. Just little pops. What about trim colors? The complementary white that Pharaoh and Ball recommends in this case specifically is Tallow, which is not technically complementary in the color theory sense because it shares a lot of similarities to setting plaster in its undertones, but because of those similarities, they'll naturally work alongside one another quite well. It's a color that has that balanced amount of pink and yellow within it, which are the same undertones that you find in setting plaster. The main difference here is Tallow's LRV, which is about 20 points higher and therefore brighter. So while you could limit this color to a corresponding baseboard, door, or trim color, you could also just as well use it on the walls in those areas that are perhaps more dimly lit and really need that added boost of freshness and vibrance. You would not want to use this color on the walls in areas that do get a lot of light because you'll just lose all of those wonderful subtleties in the color's undertones and it'll just look like plain old white instead, which it's not. It really is a beautiful off-white. If you did want something that's a little more plain as a white because perhaps it's continuing throughout your entire home and you don't want that peachy pinky theme to be too prominent everywhere, then you might be good with pointing instead, which still has a touch of that peachy quality, but not nearly as much. So it's a much more streamlined, clean approach to your white trim color. Where would I use setting plaster? I really think this is a color that is perfect for walls. Even though it's pink, which can be a tall ask for certain people to commit to, I just think it's composed in a way that gives it a surprisingly flexible feeling to it, mainly because it has that brown base and the yellow warmth to settle the pink down really nicely. A good choice for bedrooms, but I see it being used most effectively in accent rooms that are connected to the main hallway of the home. That way, it's not necessarily the first thing you see when you walk inside, but it's still visible in those adjacent living rooms and dining rooms and family rooms that are within your sight lines and just offer a bit of intrigue, but aren't prominently on display right from the get-go. Beautiful color. Thanks for the recommendation to my fellow paint people watching. And if you want more information on Farrow & Ball's history as a company, you can check out our company spotlight video right over here. It's really a fascinating story behind Farrow & Ball and a really interesting paint company altogether that pre-mixes all of their colors in the factory, which is pretty unique, I'd say.